Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jason Kohout. I'm a co-chair of the firm's family office practice. And of course, right now, everybody in family offices is very worried about what is going on in Washington, D.C. So to answer these questions, we have Scott Klug, a former congressman who is now in our public policy affairs office in Washington, D.C., and Bill Ball, who also works in our public affairs office, worked on Capitol Hill for a decade, serving the House and Senate committees on energy, natural resources, water, and infrastructure issues. And here's a fun fact about Bill. He has a lobster farm. So unfortunately, he's not going to be able to get to that farm because Senator Manchin has perhaps struck a deal. They're going to tell us how likely this is and whether Bill gets to go back to the lobster farm. So just in a nutshell, to run through what, as a tax lawyer, as a person who works with family offices, what I'm worried about. I went through the bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. What's been proposed, there is proposed language, although we'll talk about how we see that coming out. Tax-wise, there's not a significant number of provisions, but the provisions that are in there are important. There is probably the big top line headline thing is that there's a return of the corporate alternative minimum tax. And that would apply a 15% alternative minimum tax to corporations with financial revenues in excess of $1 billion. So pretty rarefied air as to who that will apply. There's also a change, they're calling it a closing the loophole of carried interest under Section 1061. It looks like that would move the treatment of 1061 from 3 years to 5 years. And your carried interest would be treated as short-term capital gain for at least 5 years. There's also a provision in that provision that says any transfer would trigger a recognition event. This could be important if you're doing estate planning for carried interest. And lastly, and probably the most significant thing for I think our families will be, there is a significant increase in the appropriations for the IRS. Pretty top line number that. For those of us who work with the IRS, this could mean a different IRS on the enforcement front. No laws would change, but on the enforcement front and how closely they're looking at some of the things we're doing, that could be impacted. Big key items, the items that are not in the bill as it is proposed, the issues about grantor trusts, limiting the use of grantor trusts, pulling them back into your state, decreases to the estate tax exemption. As we know, the estate tax exemption will go from 12 million to 6 million in 2026. That had been proposed to be accelerated. That is not in this bill. And there are no changes to net investment income tax or changes about how trusts would be taxed. So all the different things that I think a year ago I had been warning people about are not in the bill. The things that were in the Build Back Better bill, the things that have been circulated last year. So with that, we'll let our experts talk because the people I work with, they all want to know what did Joe Manchin have for breakfast? And then secondly, is this bill going to be passed in this form, or are the different things that could impact our clients, are those still on the table?
So I'll jump in first. So Bill can walk through the process of how this will play out because it's a reconciliation bill. So that's sort of its own little world in and of itself. I think the key question gets to be the fine print, right? We don't know what it says. We've all seen summaries, but the summaries don't mean anything until the writing's done. It's all in the details, as tax lawyers will know more than anybody else. That's going to take them, I would think, to the minimum of the weekend, if not early into next week. Then they have to run it through the parliamentarians. In reconciliation bills, the parliamentarian has a fairly firm grip on what's germane and not germane. And until we see it in writing and what provisions are in there that they try to tuck in, because they always will, we don't know what will be thrown out or kept in. The usual issue with the challenges is whether it has a number involved with it, the Bird rule. So anything in a reconciliation package has to have a numerical impact. That's why it's hard to change policy. You can't really change labor law. You can't change health law. You can't do any of those things. But the parliamentarian from time to time does put their finger in the dike. And so that's one issue. And then and the great unknown in all this is we've still not heard where Senator Sinema is, who oftentimes is paired with Manchin as the problem children for the Biden White House. but that somehow in a lot of the press writing you see that they're linked together at the hip, and that's really not true. They have very different interests. So Sinema's been very bullish on a lot of the clean energy provisions, which drove this bill, but she has lots of issues about taxes. And Manchin was the reverse. He was ready to raise taxes, but he had issues about what it would do on the fossil fuel industry. So until she sees things in writing, I don't think she's going to commit one way or the other. And if I was Schumer, I wouldn't sleep easy at night because she's sort of a lone wolf and can do things. So the answer is stay tuned. I think you're right, Jason, in terms of what the top line looks of this package looks like, but I think there's a long way to go before it's finished. And I think Bill's got some thoughts on that.
Scott, just before we go to Bill, you said the parliamentarian can take things out, so it can basically say, look, this is not allowed to be in the bill. Unlikely for the 3 tax provisions we talked about, although, appropriations is a different story. Maybe I might ask your thoughts on that. The second is just, do you see things coming in? Would you see them taking things off the shelf, so to speak, that were written last year and adding them to the bill?
No, but I think we really don't know what's in the bill yet, right? We've really got bold headlines. We don't have it. And I know I would not necessarily assume that the Schumer team has shown all of its cards yet. So I'd worry about details or small changes. I don't think, the net investment tax and the implications for subchapter S's and pass-throughs, I think that's off the table for now. The question will be whether they rear their ugly head after Thanksgiving as Congress heads out the door, especially if Democrats lose control. Then it'll be sort of the last shot to get stuff they want to get done. So I wouldn't sleep easy yet, but I think I would be stunned if any of those showed up. But again, I don't think we know the details even about the taxes they've talked about. So Bill, I'm sorry, back to the food fight to come.
Thank you, guys. No, I agree with Scott in the effect that until we see text on the Senate floor, things are theoretically subject to change. That being said, and he alluded to this, Majority Leader Schumer is holding this thing together with a shoestring and his caucus, and we're still out on cinema, which is a vote they need. And so it's a bit to be determined what this final package looks like. The interesting thing about reconciliation, people see it as an opportunity for the prevailing party to skirt procedural process and run through more of their, policy agenda items. But it actually has a very rigid set of guardrails on what you can and cannot do. The largest being what Scott had mentioned with the Byrd rule and the parliamentarian and what can and cannot be included in terms of excluding any policy riders directly, although like Jason, like you said, with the increase to IRS enforcement funds to hire people, under the presumption that those people will be used to enforce certain provisions of the tax code. So there's an underlying, maybe a policy nudge sometimes, but it cannot be an explicit policy rule or rider in the bill. Once we get final text, how this will kind of play out in the Senate is the reconciliation bill is limited to 20 hours of debate. That will be, senators on the floor kind of pontificating and waxing poetic about why this is good or bad or likely how this is going to fix inflation or make it worse. However, there is no limit on amendments that can be offered, and they can be offered outside of that 20-hour window. They just can't have legitimate floor debate. So people will see a lot of senators probably come out and say, I'm going to try to do this, that, and the other thing in terms of offering amendments to remove some of these renewable energy tax incentives or try to add things and remove things from the tax provisions. But I think the reality situation is, Schumer's not going to bring this to the floor unless he has his guys in lockstep. And as long as the Democrats are in lockstep and with Vice President Harris as a tiebreaker, once this thing goes to the floor, it's incredibly unlikely that we'll see change. And even amendments are very limited. They need, when you go to the floor, amendments need to be budget neutral or reduce the deficit. And so Republicans can't come, or people that oppose the tax provisions can't come and remove those because they will be removing revenue generating provisions. So that would have to be offset by also taking out spending provisions later in the bill. And so while the amendment process will be will seem wild and a little bit unhinged in terms of unpredictability and time frame, it's very unlikely that anything will be adopted. And this, once we see final text on the Senate floor, I think it's pretty much all but certain that will likely be the text that makes it back to the House. And when they get to the House, the Rules Committee, who was, ruled by the House Democrats, will kind of have control of how this plays out. And so, they'll likely just rubber stamp whatever the Senate sends, assuming the House Progressive Caucus can agree to that. They've, I think Representative Jayapal, who's the co-chair of that caucus, has been pretty guarded, but from what I can see, signaled that I think they're going to be willing to accept this. So that's always another wild card. They could say there's not enough environmental and climate change provisions in here, and we don't like the bill. But the reality is, under reconciliation rules, they have till September 30th to pass a bill, or everything wipes clean, and they'd have to go through a procedural process to do another reconciliation bill that, frankly, they don't have time to do before the end of the year. And so there's a lot of pressure on the House Democrats to likely accept if the Senate can send a bill over, because the reality is they're probably not going to have another chance this Congress.
So let me throw two other wild cards at you. One is there's a significant block in the Northeast that's still wedded to reforming SALT. So, to go back and change the tax changes the Trump administration did that capped deductions for real estate taxes and things like that. And they held out hard the first time around. I'm not sure they'll have to do it, have the time to do it this time, or be willing to really torpedo the whole package. But that's a skirmish to come in the weeks ahead of us. And then the other wild card is the senators have to be on the floor to vote, and COVID has been flying through the Senate. In fact, Durbin, who's in the Senate leadership, has been out with COVID for the last week. So if they get, two more Democrats with COVID who've got to, isolate for 4 or 5 or 6 days, then it really gets complicated because the clock starts to turn out. And if you're a candidate who's got a tough election in front of them, they want to go home and campaign. They're supposed to be out from early August till after Labor Day, and every one of those days matters if you're in a battleground state. So lots of cross pressures. At the end of the day, despite all the hurdles, assuming Sinema gets pulled along, I think that the odds are 80-20 it passes, but it's not done yet. And we've seen weirder, scenarios play out where stuff falls apart at the last moment.
Bill, do you have some odds?
I'm not placing my bets yet. I think I'm just going to sit back and watch. But I think it's with inflation, with the numbers, and looking at especially in the House and the Senate, Democrats in a very tricky political situation. They really have to get something done, and so. I think that, the political pressure of having something to talk about, that Scott said, is going to take over virtue signaling in some people's values here. So I think I would agree, it's very likely this will probably get done.
But full disclosure on my end, right? Bill and I actually are both Republicans on the call, just because we were following this the most closely of our team. But I also think in some cases this is a tough vote for Democrats to take. It may energize their base, but it's going to lead to 5 weeks of, Bill Ball voted to raise taxes, in a period of inflation. So it's got some political ramifications in both directions, I think. It helps the Democratic base get ginned up. They give the president a big win, but with approval ratings at 38% for the White House, I'm not sure it really is going to change the dynamics of the election, which still are largely focused on inflation.
Got it. Guys, I think we'll wrap it up. That's been extremely helpful. You did not make any guarantees here, but and we should note for our audience that this was recorded at 9:30 on July 29th. My feeling is, I think I get the feeling that if you listen to it even a few hours later, you may we might have a different answer for you, because I think this is going to be for the next few weeks, we're going to be in rapt attention as to what's going to happen in Washington and until it's done and Bill gets to go back to his lobster farm. So with that, thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you later. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.